On the night Isabella married a billionaire, everyone believed she was the luckiest woman alive. She had just married Alexander Sterling, one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the city. The wedding had been breathtaking. Hundreds of guests had watched them exchange vows. Cameras had captured their first kiss. Everyone saw a beautiful bride and a handsome billionaire beginning what looked like a perfect marriage. But when the wedding was over, and Isabella and Alexander were finally alone, something felt wrong. Alexander stood by the window, staring into the darkness. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't looking at his new wife like a man who had just married the woman he loved. Then he turned toward Isabella and quietly said, "There is something you need to know." Isabella smiled nervously. "What is it?" Alexander looked at her wedding ring. Then he looked into her eyes. "I didn't marry you because I love you." Isabella's smile disappeared. For several seconds, she couldn't speak. Before we go deeper into this story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy emotional relationship stories with unexpected twists, like this video, subscribe to The Shadowed Heart, and share this story with someone who loves a good mystery. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Isabella had never expected to meet a man like Alexander. She wasn't from a wealthy family. Her mother owned a small bakery, and Isabella had spent most of her life helping her. She worked hard, stayed away from trouble, and never imagined that one day she would become the wife of a billionaire. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Isabella was leaving a restaurant when she accidentally bumped into a man standing near the entrance. Her coffee spilled onto his jacket. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry." The man looked down at his jacket. Then he looked at Isabella. Instead of getting angry, he smiled. "It's okay." That man was Alexander. Neither of them knew how important that meeting would become. They started seeing each other. At first, Isabella was nervous around him. Alexander lived a completely different life. He had private drivers, security guards, and business meetings in places Isabella had never heard of. But with her, he seemed different. He laughed. He listened. He remembered the smallest things she told him. After several months, Alexander proposed. Isabella was overwhelmed. She loved him. At least, she believed she did. And she believed he loved her too. The wedding happened 3 months later. Everything looked perfect. But there were things Isabella didn't understand. Alexander's mother didn't seem happy about the marriage. His closest friend, Daniel, kept looking at Isabella strangely. And whenever Isabella asked Alexander about his family, he changed the subject. She ignored all of it. She believed love would solve everything. Then came their wedding night. After Alexander told her that he hadn't married her because he loved her, Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "Then why did you marry me?" Alexander didn't answer immediately. He walked toward the small table beside the window. There was an old photograph lying on it. He picked it up, then he handed it to Isabella. She looked at the photograph. It showed a young woman. She had dark hair, gentle eyes, and a familiar smile. Isabella stared at the photograph. "Who is she?" Alexander's voice became quiet. "Her name was Victoria." "Your ex?" Alexander nodded. "She was the woman I planned to marry before I met you." Isabella felt her heart sink. "Do you still love her?" Alexander looked away. "I did." Isabella swallowed hard. "Then why did you marry me?" Alexander finally looked at her. "Because Victoria asked me to." Isabella stared at him. "What?" Alexander took a deep breath. Victoria was sick. 3 years earlier, Victoria had been diagnosed with a serious illness. Alexander stayed by her side. He paid for the best doctors. He took her to different countries looking for treatment. But nothing worked. Then, shortly before she died, Victoria asked Alexander to promise her something. She asked him to find happiness again. Alexander promised. But there was something else. Victoria had a younger sister. A sister she had been separated from when they were children. And that sister was Isabella. Isabella stared at Alexander in disbelief. "What are you saying?" Alexander looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Victoria was your sister." Isabella stepped backward. "No. Yes? No. My sister died when I was a child." Alexander shook his head. "She didn't die when you were a child." Isabella's hands began trembling. "My mother told me she was gone. Your mother believed she was dead." Alexander reached into the drawer and pulled out an old envelope. Inside were several photographs. The first showed Victoria as a young girl. The second showed Victoria with Isabella's mother. The third showed 2 little girls standing together. Isabella looked closely. She recognized herself. She recognized the other girl. She dropped the photographs. That can't be true. Alexander knelt down and picked them up. Victoria spent years searching for you. Isabella began crying. Why didn't she find me? Because your mother changed her name and moved away after a family dispute. Isabella covered her face. Everything she thought she knew about her family was collapsing, but there was one question she couldn't stop thinking about. If you married me because of Victoria, then you don't love me? Alexander remained silent. That silence hurt more than anything. Isabella removed her wedding ring. She placed it on the table. I won't be someone's replacement. Alexander looked at the ring. You aren't. Then what am I? He looked directly into her eyes. You were supposed to be the last promise I kept to Victoria. Isabella shook her head. And now, Alexander's voice trembled. Now you're the woman I can't imagine losing. Isabella looked at him. You just said you didn't marry me because you loved me. I didn't. Then when did that change? Alexander smiled sadly. The first time you laughed at something I said. Isabella stared at him. I didn't understand what was happening to me. He continued. I thought I was protecting Victoria's memory, but slowly, I realized I wasn't looking at you because you reminded me of her. I was looking at you because you were you. Isabella's tears continued falling, but she wasn't ready to forgive him. You should have told me before the wedding. I know. You allowed me to believe you loved me for who I was. I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid that if I told you the truth, you'd leave. Isabella looked down. And now you know why. Alexander nodded. I do. The next morning, Isabella packed a suitcase. She left the mansion without saying goodbye. For the first time since meeting Alexander, she needed to be alone. She went back to her mother's bakery. When her mother saw her crying, she immediately knew something was wrong. Isabella placed the old photographs on the table. Her mother's face went pale. Where did you get these? Alexander gave them to me. Her mother sat down. Tears filled her eyes. I thought Victoria was dead. Isabella stared at her. You knew? I knew she was alive when you were young. Then why did you tell me she was dead? Her mother began crying. Because your father wanted us to forget her. Why? Her mother looked at her. Because Victoria knew something about our family. Isabella's heart stopped. What did she know? Her mother hesitated. Then she whispered, Your father didn't abandon us. Isabella froze. What? He was murdered. The room became silent. Her mother continued. Victoria found out who was responsible. Isabella felt a chill run through her body. Who? Her mother looked toward the door. Alexander's father. Isabella couldn't breathe. Suddenly, everything made sense. Alexander hadn't simply married her because of Victoria. There was another reason. He had been investigating his father's connection to her family, and Isabella had unknowingly become part of the investigation. She immediately called Alexander. He answered. Isabella? Did you know? There was silence. Did you know your father had something to do with my father's death? Alexander didn't answer. Tell me the truth. Finally, he said, Yes. Isabella closed her eyes. That's why you married me. No. Then why? Because I needed to find the truth. Isabella felt betrayed. You used me. I didn't intend to, but you did. Alexander's voice broke. Isabella, listen to me. No. She ended the call. But before she could put her phone down, a message arrived. It was from an unknown number. There was only one sentence. If you want to know who killed your father, meet me alone tonight. Isabella stared at the message. She knew she shouldn't go, but she needed answers. That evening, she went to the address. An old man was waiting. He handed her a folder. Inside were documents proving that Alexander's father had ordered the attack that killed her father. But there was one more document. A document that made Isabella's blood run cold. It contained Alexander's name. Isabella looked at the old man. What's this? He replied. Your husband knew more than he told you. Isabella's heart broke. But before she could ask another question, she heard footsteps behind her. Alexander appeared. Isabella, don't trust him. She turned around. Why? Alexander looked at the old man. Because he was one of the men who helped my father. The old man smiled. Then suddenly, police sirens filled the street. Alexander had secretly recorded their entire conversation. The truth finally came out. Alexander's father had indeed been responsible for Isabella's father's death. But Alexander had spent years collecting evidence against him. He hadn't married Isabella to replace Victoria. He hadn't married her simply because of a promise. He had fallen in love with her. but he had been too afraid to tell her the whole truth. Months later, Isabella stood beside Alexander at her father's memorial. She looked at him. "You should have trusted me." "I know. You almost lost me." "I know that too." Isabella smiled. "I'm still angry." Alexander smiled back. "I'll spend the rest of my life earning your forgiveness." She looked down at her wedding ring. Then she took his hand, because sometimes love doesn't begin with a perfect first kiss. Sometimes it begins with a painful truth, and sometimes the person who enters your life for one reason becomes the person you never want to lose. What would you have done if you were Isabella? Would you forgive Alexander after discovering why he married you, or would you walk away? Tell us your answer in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe to The Shadowed Heart for more emotional stories filled with love, secrets, and unexpected twists. We'll see you in the next story.